It's California Edition. My name is Brad Pomerance. So glad you're still with us. Our guest today will be Alan Lowenthal. He's a member of the California State Senate, as well as a candidate for the United States Congress. We congratulate you on coming first in your primary. Your election will be held in November. I want to talk about an issue that both touches state and federal, and that is high-speed rail. There was recently a vote on whether the state should appropriate money for high-speed rail, and Alan Lowenthal voted no. Why?
Well, I think that I was the chair of transportation in 2008 when we put it on the ballot. I fought to put it on the ballot. I made sure that I rounded up both Republican and Democratic votes to put it on the ballot. I've been supportive of every appropriation for high-speed rail. I think the concept of high-speed rail is great. But I've held 10 to 15 hearings on high-speed rail. I've traveled the state, and I really have and I think the underlying assumption that when they first did it, that it doesn't make any difference where you start. There'll be financial monies that
because
that will be
it's starting in Central California.
In the central, and I think that the financial plan and the business plan to start it in the middle of the state is irresponsible. I think that it leaves a stranded asset, and it does not have independent utility of itself. And so what I would really like to do is to see the money spent on those parts of the high-speed rail system that would have independent utility. That means that they could function now without any additional money, and that's to move the money to the Los Angeles, Anaheim corridor, and also the San Francisco corridor.
Well, as I understand it, some of the money that was appropriated will be spent.
Well, that's because
on those two corridors, but it will also be spent in Central California.
Well, originally we were just going to be spending $6 billion, $3 billion federal money, approximately $3 billion of state money on the high-speed rail, and that was all going to be spent in the Central Valley. But because of myself and two other Democrats, the now chair of transportation, and Senator DeSaulnier, and also Senator Simitian, who is the chair of the Budget Subcommittee on High-Speed Rail, and I'm the chair of the Select Committee on High-Speed Rail. All of us wanted to see the money spent in places where, if we did not get additional federal money, that the railroad would work.
But all three of you, including Fran Pavley, voted no.
And because of that, because we pushed them real hard, they moved from that $6 billion an additional $1.9 billion, of which $1.3 billion an additional money will be spent in the Los Angeles Anaheim corridor, or to be spent in the San Francisco. So we moved.
But if they moved in your direction, why didn't you vote yes?
It wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to do it. We presented a proposal, an alternative proposal, where 4 of the $6 billion that they're spending in the Central Valley, without any additional funds, would be spent either in the LA area, and they decided not to do that.
What's interesting is that you are running for Congress, and when you run for Congress and become a member of Congress, there's a lot of pressure to vote with your president.
That's right.
You're running as a Democrat. The Obama administration is very strongly in favor of high-speed rail.
That's right.
His Secretary of Transportation came out, a Republican, to convince you. So, wow, I mean, it could be a rocky start if you get to Washington come November, December, January.
I think that as an advocate for an all-electric system, that I also have to be an advocate for the fiscal responsibility of the state. We cannot allow, we're going to have, where the state of California needs to make sure that our own house is in order. We will now have to pay a great deal of debt service on a part of this high-speed rail plan that is not going to be connected. I felt that was inappropriate to do that I had a fiscal responsibility to the people of this state.
And interestingly, the voters seem to agree with you.
I think they do.
Although in 2008 the bond measure passed with 53% of the vote, recent polling, I think it was a field poll, came out that 59% would oppose it.
Because at that time when we passed the bond, it was a different world. We thought that there would be unlimited resources. It didn't make any difference where you started it. The federal government would be our partner. They would put up the vast majority of money, and that our role in the state was just to make sure that our money was spent wisely. Well, we do not have partners now. The world has changed, so even those of us that are advocates for high-speed rail want to make sure it's done in a fiscally responsible way, and this plan is not fiscally responsible.
Should you get to Washington, though, I presume that you would be a voice that will be turned to on the issue of California high-speed rail.
I certainly hope so, because we need high-speed rail, but we need it done right.
Well, but the question becomes, the vote has been taken, the money is appropriated.
Yes.
Will you be supportive of the plan as it is, or will you work to fight against it, as many Republicans are doing right now in Washington?
No, I'm not going to work against it any longer. I have stood up for a better, more fiscally responsible plan. I am a supporter of high-speed rail. And when I go to Washington, I will work with the delegation to understand that for California, which is putting up the vast majority of the money now, the federal government's only putting up $3 billion, we're putting up $10 billion, that whatever choices we make in the future have to be consistent with the well-being of California and cannot put California at risk, and I will work for that.
At the same time, we know that in November there will be an initiative on the ballot supported by Governor Brown, which would increase sales tax by 1/4 cent for 4 years, increase tax on the wealthy for 7 years. You said on the record that if the high-speed rail appropriation passes, it could kill the chances for that initiative to pass. Do you stand by those words?
Well, yes, I do. And I think that it's not that I'm not going to be supportive of that, but I think that we're going to see the campaign where people are going to say that you're putting all this money into a stranded asset in the Central Valley. You're going to have to pay all this debt service. Why should we be paying taxes when there's going to be and really that money is going to go just to pay the debt service? I think that we should have done a better plan.
Okay, but here we are today, and the governor has said, the Democratic caucus has said that if this initiative does not pass, the ramifications will be dramatic. The school year could be cut by 3 weeks. CSU, for example, you were a professor at CSULB. The entire system has said they are waitlisting everyone that applies for the fall of 2012, and if it doesn't pass, they don't know who they're going to admit. So this is a serious issue.
Well, right. I believe, Brad, that the question is, even though I disagree with this plan, and I worked real hard to make sure as much money came to LA and came to, which I think could have been defended, I think that to pass in November, to pass any tax initiative, the critical issue will be whether the state has an appropriate pension reform. That will be the issue. And people will make that decision.
And let's
more so than on high-speed rail.
Well, let's talk about pension reform. The governor proposed a plan last year.
Yes.
Your Republican colleagues they actually put that plan into legislation. They said, okay, we'll adopt the governor's plan. The Democratic leaders refused to adopt the governor's plan, which was submitted by the Republicans. Where do we stand?
I think we stand now with, first, that we have as close to a mandate to have to pass it as possible. Without true pension reform, it'll be very difficult to pass the tax. And I think that the compromise will be whether the legislature can move close to the governor.
Do you think the voters understand the gravity of the situation as it relates to pensions? We know that San Jose and San Diego passed pension reform overwhelmingly, but a field poll came out recently, your aide reminded me of it, and that field poll suggested that the voters may not see that pensions could, as some would argue, bankrupt the state.
Well, I think that voters are caught in the dilemma that all of us are caught in. They realize that public safety is our highest priority. If you're talking about pension reform, you're talking about pensions for police and fire primarily, and then for teachers. People are very concerned that we should not be cutting and eliminating their ability to have, and that's a very dangerous position. And so I'm not into eviscerating public safety, because that's really where the question is: do we have a sustainable system? We were told in around 15 years ago that the stock market was rising, that we were overfunded. This would be a sustainable system that we had. And people went forward believing it's not sustainable.
So if you had to predict, will we see pension reform by election day?
We will definitely see, and it will be sustainable.
Bipartisan?
Bipartisan.
Oh, we'll have to see. His name is Alan Lowenthal. He's a member of the California State Senate. He is a candidate for Congress. That election will be held in November 2012. I'm Brad Pomerance. You're watching California Edition.
What is the world's record for the fastest speed of a high-speed rail train? 257, 302, 357, or 361 miles per hour? In 2003, Japan's MLX-01 traveled 361 miles per hour.
Welcome back to California Edition. Our guest, Bill Emerson, member of the California State Senate. And I know you represent portions of San Bernardino County, so I would be remiss if I didn't ask you, what do you make of the bankruptcy of the county's main city, major city, San Bernardino?
Well, it's unfortunate, and it's something that I think we're going to see more of. And we've seen Stockton filed for bankruptcy, and now we're talking about Compton.
Right, Mammoth Lakes.
And Mammoth Lakes. And so I think, the uncertainty of redevelopment, home mortgage crisis, and all those things are coming to a forefront and causing major problems in cities.
And Mayor Patrick Morris of San Bernardino said on the record that one of the reasons his city fell on such hard times was because of employee compensation and pensions. If you look at their pension obligations, they have been soaring and will continue to soar at the rate that they are going. Now, I'm not here to bash public employees. They do fine work. But he is not alone. I mean, he's a Democrat. You happen to be a Republican. We hear Democrats and Republicans saying that pensions are breaking the backs of municipalities, of counties, of the state. What do you see, sir?
Well, I agree with the mayor, and I agree with the governor on this issue. And the governor has asked for the legislature to deal with the pension issue this year. And we only have 1 month of the session left. And so I'm not seeing a lot of interest by the majority party for making that correction.
It is interesting, and we've spoken about this, and I've said this on the record. You know, the Republican Party in Sacramento, it's hard to deny that they outmaneuvered the legislative Democrats when you submitted the Democratic governor's 12-point pension plan.
Absolutely, and that's something that I found to be extremely interesting. The legislature has had since January to act on this issue, and they have failed to act. And now we've passed the deadline to put parts of the pension reform on the ballot.
But let me ask you, I had thought that the legislature could pass pension reform that would be ingrained in the Constitution and not need to go to the voters. Is that accurate?
I'm not real sure about that, but if we did it as an urgency vote with the 2/3, then that may have some difference in law. But I'm to that point, I am not really certain.
So I've spoken with some legislative Democrats, I'm sure you have too, and they have said that while they don't think it likely that all 12 points will be passed or they will support all 12 points, there are some significant points that they are going to support. Are the legislative Republicans willing to come to the table and support 9 of the 12 or 6 of the 12? Or is it really all or nothing right now for the legislative Republicans?
Well, we haven't seen what the majority party wants to put for us today. So it's hard for me to make that choice. My biggest concern is the out-year public pension obligations on healthcare could rise to be as much as $1/3 of $1 trillion. That's a huge problem for the state of California, and we need to get a handle on this. I think our public employees do a wonderful job, and I think they should be fairly compensated, and they should have a fair retirement system. The way it is now, it's not fair to the California taxpayers in any way, shape, or form, and we need to make the changes to give them a reasonable pension, but not at the expense of the California taxpayer.
But the challenge becomes, under contract law, dating back to common law from England, a government cannot retroactively change a pension plan unless there's a negotiation to retroactively change a pension plan. So will we see the benefits without such a negotiation?
Yeah. I believe that is correct, and we were looking originally at just changing the out years to sort of stop the bleeding and get the whole situation under control. There are several cases in law where in the city of Baltimore the court ruled that that the state legislature could change the pensions there because of the impending bankruptcy of that city in that state.
But is the state on the verge of bankruptcy? Can the state file for bankruptcy?
States cannot, because we have the ability to raise fees through taxes and fees. But I think that's an issue that needs to be discussed, and if California is impending future relies on some change on pensions, then maybe we can retroactively go back.
What I'm wondering is, look, if I'm a leader of a union, I look at the landscape, I see San Jose, not a conservative city, passing pension reform 65%. I see San Diego, moderate conservative city, passing pension reform 65%. 18 of 20 cities who have had pension reform before the voters have passed. The only two that didn't pass were San Francisco. Well, that's a big surprise. Yeah. The tea leaves are there. Is there an attempt to talk to the unions and say, look, come to the table. Come to the table, let's figure this out, because anyone could draft an initiative and it may not be to your liking, and it's not so easy to undo an initiative. Let's get in a room together.
Yeah. Well, there was an initiative that was drafted to make changes, and the proponents actually backed off because they thought the governor and the legislature was going to act on the governor's 12-point plan. So that language is there. It's more restrictive than what the governor's plan and what the 5 Republican senators put forward.
Which includes you.
That includes
me. You're part of the GOP 5.
I'm part of the GOP 5.
Yes.
And I think that those issues should be telling to the unions that it's time to have the negotiation.
Look at Wisconsin. This is a pretty darn blue state, and a governor who was as opposed to, quote, public union pensions as you can imagine. He was reaffirmed in a recall.
It's exactly right. And I think if I were a public employee and I thought that my state may go through bankruptcy and I lose my benefits, then that's problematic to the employee as well.
I want to shift gears, if I may, because coming up, we're going to be speaking with the dean of UCR Medical School, UC Riverside. He said to me, and I'll say this on the record, that you have been the biggest supporter out there of UCR Medical School, which is a badge of honor if you ask me. You are a dentist. Not too many medical professionals in the legislature. You're one of them. Talk to me about UCR Medical School. It was denied accreditation last year. As we speak today, a second application is pending. Are you hopeful?
Well, I am hopeful, and we have asked the governor to put out a statement that he is supportive of the med school, that perhaps not this year, that when the state's fiscal position is in a better shape. But the statement he made when he was here in Riverside some months ago left the door closed on that issue. And that's difficult for the accrediting body to approve accreditation for school when the governor makes that kind of a statement.
Yet Dean Olds, he said to me when I spoke with him, we'll be speaking with him coming up, that this medical school has raised its own funds, $100 million.
They have, but I think part of what the CME, or the Committee on Medical Education, requires in accreditation is to show a pathway for state funding on an ongoing basis.
I would be remiss if I didn't speak with you, and I'll speak with the dean about it as well. I want to mention this editorial that came out through the LA Times, one of the state's main newspapers, and they came out against UCR Medical School. I got to say, I was kind of surprised. I don't know where it came from.
Yeah, it surprised me as well, and my concern about that article, I don't think it was accurate in a lot of ways. UCR has had 2 years of a medical school since the 1970s, and this is just expanding that program into
the second 2 years. The
second 2 years.
UCLA.
Because the need for the aging population, baby boomers, are increasing at record rates, and so we're seeing a need for additional healthcare providers. Who knows what happens under the new federal healthcare plan? But I don't see I don't see that we're going to have a reduction in healthcare providers. So we need UCR Med School.
In the final analysis, do you think the accreditation committee says yay?
I do. We're working with the governor to tone down his statement and just admit that a new med school is needed, but maybe not tomorrow, but that we can get that passed.
Dr. Bill Emerson, Senator Bill Emerson, we thank you for joining us. When we come back, we'll be speaking with the Dean of UCR Medical School, Brad Pomerance. We'll be right back on Charter California Edition.
How many medical schools are accredited in the United States? 138, 155, 185, or 198? The Association of American Medical Colleges has accredited 138 medical schools in the U.S. They have also accredited 17 medical schools in Canada.
Welcome back to California Edition. I'm Brad Pomerance. Our guest is Richard Olds. He is the dean of UC Riverside's medical school, which as we speak today is not operating yet as a 4-year medical school. We'll get there in a moment. First, I want to talk to you, Dean, about the Affordable Care Act. That is federal health care reform that was upheld by the U.S. Supreme Court. Could you give us a sense, not the politics, but the practical aspects of the Affordable Health Care Act?
Well, basically, our country has a large number of individuals that have no health insurance. And as a result, they get their health care largely in emergency rooms, largely when they're very sick, require hospitalization. That's a very expensive thing to do, and it's one of the reasons why we in this country spend considerably more money than any other country in the world on their health care, but don't get very good value from it in that we're not a particularly healthy country.
So as you look at the particulars of the Affordable Care Act, do you believe that it will decrease these emergency room visits that really should be primary care visits?
Well, interestingly, it's already subjected to a randomized trial. This is the famous Oregon trial where access to in this case Medicaid insurance, was a lottery system, and they looked after 2 years of those that won the lottery got Medicare insurance, and those that lost the lottery continued to not have insurance, and those that basically had Medicare insurance got most of their care in outpatient clinics, were healthier, and of course cost the system less money. So I don't think there's any doubt that providing rudimentary ambulatory-based health care and chronic disease management for all patients is a much more cost-effective way to do that. But to do that, we have to have more primary care doctors. Now, we already have a shortage of primary care doctors in the United States, a critical shortage of primary care doctors in inland Southern California, and if you add another 500,000 insured patients to inland Southern California, for sure we're going to have a critical shortage. That's the role then of the medical school, is to try to train doctors for the future reality of healthcare and to train more primary care doctors.
So let's talk about the medical school. It has been your passion for the last few years. As we know, the UCR Medical School applied for accreditation last year, and in a bit of a surprise, it was denied. And the reason it was denied was due to a lack of commitment from the state of California to fund the medical school. Unlike other medical schools who did not see accreditation the first year, UC Riverside has applied again. As we speak today, the application is pending. What can you tell us, sir?
Well, I would say probably the lowest point in my professional career is when we didn't get accredited last year. Recognize there's only been 2 schools in the country that have ever been turned down. Basically, we had been given $10 million by the state, but only 1-year money, but you would anticipate that they would then give ongoing support. When we were dropped from the budget the following year, basically the national accrediting body said, well, you're a state medical school, you were depending on the state for much of your functions, we're not going to accredit you based on that. Well, looking at that situation, it became clear that the state of California's financial difficulties were not likely to change in the very near future.
Right.
And we really can't wait 4 or 5 years for things to get turned around in California. So we felt the only way to get the school open is to try to raise the money to open the school, granted in the smallest form we thought we could get away with, 50 students. And we felt that we had to raise $10 million a year for 10 years, or $100 million in order to go back and ask to be accredited. And between last year and this year, we have successfully raised $100 million, $10 million a year for 10 years. Based on that, we went back in. We were granted actually a second site visit. That's never been done before.
Really?
And we were site visited about a week and a half ago. We will not learn until the late fall what the actual result of that was, but I would say that it was a very positive site visit. I anticipate, I'm cautiously optimistic that we'll get the school open for a start in 2013.
Now, it's remarkable you were able to raise that money, $100 million like you said, in these very difficult times. I know that the Riverside County Board of Supervisors helped, as well as the UC Board of Regents. There is a line of credit that's been opened. Where else did you turn?
Well, interestingly, I think our approach was different. Rather than ask people for just money, we actually asked them for a long-term commitment. And the long-term commitment in many ways turned out to be more important than the money itself. So that when we ask groups to support us, whether it's $1 million, $500,000, $100,000, $10,000, you make it for 10 years.
I understand.
So you give us a 10-year commitment. That demonstrates that you're in it for the duration. And that was, I think, a very important strategy because it really brought the long-term partners that believed in the long-term investment in our area. One of the first dollars came actually from the Desert Healthcare District. Rural districts are actually taxing areas that support largely hospitals, and they felt that one of the biggest game changers for the Coachella Valley was to invest in a medical school that would service our own region, since they have a critical shortage of physicians. There's 2 areas alone in the Coachella Valley with only 1 primary care doctor for 9,000 patients. The number you want is 1 in 2,000. Third world countries define a shortage as 1 in 3,500. So with that type of a critical problem, they basically invested in us.
So presuming the medical school opens next fall, the big challenge becomes how do you cajole the graduates to return to inland California after their residency, or rural California, or whatever the goal may be?
Well, you have to understand why doctors practice where they practice if you want to make any inroads in that. Doctors practice based on only 2 drivers. Where they come from, that's about 40% of the decision, divided between where they're born, where they went to high school, and where they went to college, and where they finish their training.
Right.
Now, doctors have to graduate from medical school, and they have to train in something in order to practice medicine. So actually building the medical school is only part of the equation. In fact, some would say it's the least important part.
Will there be residency programs at UC Riverside Medical School?
Absolutely, otherwise we wouldn't accomplish that mission. In fact, I think it would be best to describe us as building a pipeline. Because we're in an area of California with the lowest college going rate, the lowest standardized tests in the state, I have to have pipeline programs that bring more of our own students to be qualified for medical school so I can select them.
Sure.
Then I have to have a medical school that trains them for the future. And then I have to have graduate medical education programs in the 6 disciplines in shortest supply. Those are primary care internal medicine, primary care pediatrics, family medicine, but in addition, general surgery, OB, and psychiatry, because our area of California is particularly short in those 6 specialties.
So you will have residency programs in those 6 areas?
In all 6 of those areas. In fact, when all completed, we will have as many residents graduating at the end of that pipeline as we have entering the med school. Wow. So we are simultaneously building graduate medical education with undergraduate medical education medical schools.
Will there be a preference for UC medical graduates in terms of acceptance into UC medical residency programs?
As you know, we have historically taken the 28 students that we currently take in partnership with UCLA from our own undergraduate campus. And we are going to continue that. So we'll continue to take 24 students roughly out of our own undergraduate campus, but we'll also take students from other universities.
Of course.
But we will give a preference to those that actually come geographically from our areas, and particularly those that come geographically from the areas in most need of physicians.
What about the residency issue? Because like you said, you need to get them in the last place they trained.
Well, we will also, of course, give preference to our own medical students for our own residencies. But for instance, we sort of never lose out on our own students. If you were born, let's say, in Riverside, and let's say instead of coming to our medical school, you went to some place like Harvard, well, that wouldn't be a bad move.
No.
But we would want you to come back into one of our residency programs.
Of course.
So in a sense, it's not an absolute continuum, but by building both pipeline programs, a medical school, and the graduate medical education programs in roughly the same size, the end result will be a continuous pipeline for doctors well into the future.
I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about what some are arguing was a surprising editorial out of the LA Times in July, which argued against the opening of UCR's medical school.
Well, you know, the statement that California has enough doctors may be true in West Los Angeles, but, you know, if they looked to South Central Los Angeles, they discover very close to their headquarters that there's a huge shortage of doctors because it's an underserved area that has a hard time attracting doctors. And even Los Angeles has a shortage of primary care doctors. It's not all about doctors, it's having doctors go into the right fields. Now, we unfortunately don't happen to live in an area that has a surplus of doctors. We have a 3,000 physician shortage today. We'll have a 5,000 physician shortage in 10 years. We have half the primary care doctors we have. That's even before health reform.
We wish you the very best of luck in terms of accreditation. His name is Dean Richard Olds of the UC Riverside Medical School. My name is Brad Pomerance. Thank you so much for watching Charter California Edition.